Hello, family. Welcome back to Landline, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. So you're going to have to get it. You're going to have to listen to a quick recap of the RNC convention. I did watch it. It was pretty horrendous. We're also going to hit some black fraternities. And get this, MAGA is trying to privatize the weather. That one is going to be very interesting to talk about because I was furious. Anyway, so I did watch the RNC. Feel bad for me. I did it so that you didn't have to. And yes, it was terrible. But remember that this is like the Republican National Convention. So yes, it sucked. But also it sucked so much that a Grindr exec said the RNC was like the Super Bowl for the app. Okay? Allegedly. So the subject of, yesterday's episode, if y'all listened to it, was J.D. Vance. Yes, he was also at the RNC convention. If I haven't convinced you that he's a demon, he hates abortion. He believes that religion should be in the schools. And remember that this guy used to call Trump America's Hitler. So that's just a re-up for those of you who don't know. Think about how quick he flipped that switch. The only thing more dangerous than like a Nazi is a man with no convictions. Because again, he won't just sell out himself. He'll sell out his own people. So I watched him there. He gave his little speech. It was fairly lackluster. His baby face. He's wearing a baby blue tie. Like, you know what he looks like? He looks like like a bear, like a Care Bear if they had a Nazi version of it. Donald Trump came late. And I'm not going to lie. It was masterfully done. I'm furious. He came late to the convention and it was so dull and so unanimated. And then he walked in and he actually looked like a human, which is weird. I think it's because his right ear got clipped. So just think of that. Gay ear, you know what I mean? So I don't know. It feels like that's the only thing. He got his little applause. He even seemed touched for a moment. He sat down and then proceeded to almost fall asleep throughout the entire thing. It was like one boring speech after the other, and it was like weird antebellum wedding music being like as interludes between the entire thing. One thing that took me by surprise was Amber Rose. Amber Rose was a main speaker at the RNC. Now, if you're like me and forgot who she was, I will remind you that she was initially known for being in relationships with Ye, formerly Kanye West, and Wiz Khalifa, right? So you might remember her from that era. Fast forward, she kind of came into her own, pun intended, to be like this heroine of feminism, this like speaker for sluts. She was all over Slut Walk and she was all over the internet talking about what it means for a woman to like own her body. And now she's MAGA. Just think about that. She's been aggressively pushing their agenda to her millions of followers on IG for months. And I will say, you don't have to worry about Amber Rose. It was an incredibly lackluster performance. No one was stirred whatsoever. The only thing, more ambiguous than her lackluster AI-generated speech is her racial identity, which for the record is still too dark for everybody in that room. You should have seen how Matt Walsh was talking about her. I really don't understand why anyone is a part of this weird little fascist agenda at this point, but there you have it. Anyway, that's my recap of the RNC. I'm sorry you had to go through it, but I did, so you do too. There was the usual stuff about taking the country back and how the Democrats incite violence. And again, I just want to remind you that since 2016, when Trump came in office, between 2016 and 2022, 75% of all extremist attacks in the country have been right-wing and Republican, so far right, including this latest attempt on Trump's life, if you want to know how backwards things are today. 4% has come from left-wing, I'm using air quotes here, extremism, because we can get into that one day, but I'm not convinced that we actually know what that is. Anyway, so that's it for the RNC. On to the next. I did mention we were going to talk about black frats. This one bothers me. So basically, Alpha Phi Alpha, they have banned trans people from their membership. I'm going to preface this with the reminder that all people across every race are equally homophobic and transphobic, which means that people are boring generally. Unfortunately, that's what this world kind of like brings for, like, it's almost as if homophobia and transphobia are really the universal unifiers. Alpha Phi Alpha is the second black fraternity to do so. The first one was Phi Beta Sigma. Now, this is curious to me, right? So the Guardian report, which reported on this story, right? This is where I got this news from, found that the Phi Beta Sigma's chapters, their bylaws included verbiage that limits membership to, quote, natural-born males who identify as such. Natural-born males who identify as such, right? So GLAAD reported that Phi Beta Sigma, the ban came after the organization accepted its first transgender member. So this means that the ban happened as backlash to somebody being there who was trans-identified. And now the latest ban followed a debate at the fraternity's annual convention, and it was subsequently voted and approved. Majority ruled. So what's not clear is how this ban will be enforced, how many active members currently identify as trans, and whether or not it will only apply to new members or current members. So here's the question. That's been on my mind, and it is on my mind all the time, and I wonder if you think about it too sometimes. Should every space be accessible to everyone? I have mixed feelings about that. I don't believe that every space should be accessible to everyone. I can't stand identitarianism. That being said, I do support specific identity-based resourcing because of this wacky, unfair world that we live in, especially when it comes to race, class, and ability. So context matters. Context is the thing that matters to me, which brings me to the point that I want to make here, which is why black fraternities exist in the first place. Black fraternities exist because black men were not allowed entry into white Greek letter orgs because of their skin color. So even though, like other young men in the world, they longed for the same kind of community and opportunity and brotherhood, the reason that they were excluded from white frats was simply because they were black. Thus, we have black fraternities. So at this point, it is very odd to me that we're still talking about a population of people who are oppressed. Black men are an oppressed population. So it's very odd to me that not only are they themselves marginalized for being black, they are now marginalizing other black people. Remember that the key issue for why black fraternities exist was because of race, right? And yes, gender in a fraternity is a given, right? That's cool, that's their whole shtick. So if the person lines up with a gender identity mandate, what the fuck is the problem? Why in the world would any of us see through the agenda of weirdo white dudes who are bigots for them? Why would we ever? I mean, how ashy do you have to be? I personally cannot wrap my head around this. We weren't thinking about trans people 5 years ago, right? And I know because I was like trans then, however much I'm trans now, nigga, I have no fucking clue. Anyway, I was trans then, no one really cared. No one really cared. 5 years before that, no one definitely cared. So one has to ask themselves, why has the trans issue become such a lightning rod issue when trans people represent less than 1% of the population? Trans people aren't stealing nobody's jobs. Are trans people annoying? Yeah, we're annoying. Sometimes I can't stand us. In fact, most of us have blocked each other on social media. We can't stand each other half the time. The whole community is held together by 6 non-binary people who still do potlucks, okay? But we're down. Do white trans women who just transitioned like 6 months ago wake up and only talk about white transness? Yes, of course. Of course they do. We get it. You were a gamer and you feel excluded now. We understand. It's serious. Okay, yes. But does that mean that we're going to just automatically like jump to see through the agenda of fucking bigots? Or have we've lost the plot. We've lost the plot. The thing that makes me feel, moved, of course, is that even in this lightning rod moment, and that was the point I was trying to make, is that the trans issue, the quote unquote trans issue, is not something that we came up with. Nobody across the left, no black person, no Muslim people, the trans issue comes right out of the playbook of far right extremism, right? It comes out of the Daily Wire. It comes out of like little Ben Shapiro and weirdo Matt Walsh. Why in the world are we a thinking people? I think we are. Are we not the cultural producers in this universe? So explain to me why we're using a handbook written by like the world's ugliest hate mongers. Make that make sense to me. As marginalized people, right? When we start to see through the agenda for them, they don't even have to do the work. They just throw us the playbook and then we just put it in action. Like, I'm sorry. I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around this because, again, this issue only became a quote, this like quote unquote issue only became an issue because white people decided, and specifically a small subset of very annoying white men who have maybe 8 brain cells between them decided that it was going to be an issue. So they threw a ball at us and we caught it. Now we're juggling? Like, come on, nah. I'm really angry, but the thing that really heartens me is, it's now we have like 2 black fraternities. There's 7 other ones, right? At the end of the day, we always end up, the majority of us, and I want to say the left and definitely black folks, because we are the population that bails out this country, we always end up on the right side of history. But what I want to be very clear about is not, and this is for every one of us, not falling victim to this bullshit, not falling victim to the noise. I think right now everyone is feeling very isolated. We're stuck and locked in algorithmic bubbles. So our ability to see other points of view are just not there. This thing makes me think of J.D. Vance. Do you know that I told you I've despised this man for a very long time. And I have been doing a little bit more research I wanted to pinpoint exactly when he changed. Because he did change. And I'm going to tell you this. Because, the change was so stark that, there's a Washington Post article that talks about it because we do know that something's going on with men, right? We do know that. And I would argue, and I think I would win, I would make a case for the fact that the left has not done a great job in speaking to the conflicts and the experiences of men. This is what happens when we frame something around violent genders versus gendered violence, right? Masculinity is not inherently oppressive. Misogyny and patriarchy are, and we have to look at men as people who experience that, even though they sometimes perpetuate it themselves. But we have this whole blanket thing about how masculinity is inherently violent, and I'm sorry, that's just simply not true. It really reduces people in the most common base way, and when we flatline people's identities, we also flatline their experiences. So what do? They go and they seek affirmation elsewhere. Are some dudes hoes? Of course. But honestly, the vast majority of them are just simple bitches, Anyway, the point that I wanted to make is there's a reason why people like J.D. Vance and even maybe some of these folks in these like fraternities, why they flip. And think of Hitler. Like, this guy flipped. He was normal. And then he got rejected, and then he wasn't normal. Think of all the dudes who never got over getting rejected in the 7th grade and now are incels online. I read this, and I'm going to tell you something. It was from a journalist, and I'm going to 100% verify it. But it's like, at this stage, 80% verified. They say that around the exact same time that J.D. Vance flipped the switch, and remember, Washington Post has an article about it, his friends were stunned to the extent that he just flipped the switch. They say that it was because his film, right? So the film that was made from his book, Hillbilly Elegy, was kind of ripped apart by a couple progressive criticism. So like a couple critics, apparently, on what would be considered progressive outlets said, this is kind of shit. And that was it. That's all it took. That's all it took for this person overnight to completely reinvent himself. Remember that he called Trump a demagogue. Remember that he called him cultural heroin for the underclass. Remember that he called him American Hitler, and then remember that he just reinvented himself overnight. For some people, that's all it takes. So be very wary of these moments where we flip, or where people flip, or maybe friends you know or people you know are in that process of slippery slope where resentment just kind of takes over. And with that, on to the next. I really believe that there is I don't have anything useful to say except for this. Anytime I'm not sure how to feel, I remember when I was sitting on a panel with Angela Davis. That's another, I am dropping that again for some of you. Yes, I was sitting on a panel with Angela Davis, and she was asked what it was like when she was in prison. And remember, this is like 70s, 60s. She's facing life imprisonment. And she was asked, were you ever afraid? Did you ever give up hope? And she said, no, I never gave up hope. And I always remember that. You have to look to the stories that affirm goodness in the world. So I'm not going to focus on these two very ashy black fraternities. I'm going to focus instead on the 7 others. And you know what? I'm going to focus on the people who voted against it, because guess what? There were a lot of people who voted against that too. Unfortunately, it doesn't always go the way that we want, but America is a weird place with who had a bigot for a president at one point. Now we have one who might disintegrate at any moment. We might have a bigot again, but that doesn't mean that there weren't really amazing people, and are amazing people in this country doing really phenomenal work. So seek those stories out. The last thing I'll say on to the next, with this little weather situation, I don't need to belabor the fact MAGA plans to end free weather reports. I couldn't wrap my head around it, but just think about how I'm a weather checker. Even though I'd be living in LA, I'm a weather checker. I need to know how hot it's going to be. I wake up in the morning, I need to know. If I'm traveling somewhere, I need to know, right? If you're packing, you need to know. It's one of those things that's just ingrained in our day-to-day. So Project 2025 would all but dissolve the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I said that. That's right, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That is what they are, why we get free weather reports. So on average, Americans are paying through their taxes maybe $4 per person to make this happen. They're gutting it the way that they're gutting public education. That's just, it's gone. It's absolutely gone if MAGA wins. But you can see that if you're watching how funding works, that it too is like funds are being redirected to more private entities. I want you to think about this, because we think, oh, weather report. How do we know when hurricanes are coming? How do we know when thunderstorms are so dangerous that people could have accidents, could crash? How do we know when there's dangerous fog? How do we know when there's fires, and how those fires are impacting the air that we breathe? We know these things because meteorologists and weather reports tell us this. This has been a free right. If that doesn't move you, along with all the other shit that we know Project 2025 represents, then let my personal plea move you. How will I know how many hoodies to pack? How will I know? Who's going to let me know? Who's going to tell me how many hoodies I need? Because I know I need at least 6 just naturally. So how am I supposed to know? I need to know how many sweaters to pack. Please be moved by my plight. I can't believe they're going to privatize the weather. If we don't beat these golf playing, khaki wearing hoes, I won't. We don't even need to go there. I won't. Anyway, I'm sending some love out to y'all. How about we hit those VMs and tee up that question for the day?
Hi, Future. I'm Maggie. I'm visiting LA from New York. And my question is, if you had to live anywhere else in the world, where would it be and why?
Good question, Maggie. Honestly, you said you're from New York. I got to be in that city. I would be in New York City. Maybe not the state. Maybe I can have dinner with some of y'all, but I'm not living in New York State. I live in New York City, and that's partly because I like deep waters. I love the comedy scene there. I enjoy the hustler energy there, and I'm like, let me be all up in that right now. So that's where I would be. I think that's where I'm headed at some point, but for now, LA forever. It's a good time to be here. Thank you, Kendrick, so much for that. So yeah, that's where I would be. Really appreciate the question. Sending so much love out to y'all. And with that, that's it for the day. Mad love. Just thank y'all for listening to Landline. It means the world to us. The show really is a labor of love, as you know. New episodes do drop on the daily. We're available on Spotify and Apple right now, soon to be everywhere else. I am capping it at 3 this week because I am sick and it's taken everything I have. Don't forget, we want to hear from you. Send us a voice note with questions at landlinewithjfk@gmail.com. Shout out to Alyssa and the Landline team, and shout out to you, the listeners who make it all possible. Peace.